Good morning, Ohio State fans. Welcome back to the 11 Dubcast for Monday, November 10th. Fresh off of what would be a letdown performance for some in what was a 34-10 Ohio State victory over the Purdue Boilermakers this past weekend. Again, this is just one of those circumstances that speaks to our spoiled spot we find ourselves in as Buckeye fans, fans of the defending national champions. But to sift through the wreckage with me is our senior producer at 11 Warriors, Chase Brown. Chase, were you emotionally let down by what happened over the weekend? Are you in a good place? How are you doing today?
Well, Ohio State didn't cover, so it means they're not great. That's what the saying tells me. But
Yep.
no, I'm doing well. Excited to break down the Ohio State Purdue game from this weekend with you.
Well, I'm glad you're here. Before we get into our breakdown of the game, we do want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor at the 11 Dubcast and 11 Warriors this Ohio State football season. That would be First Bank of Central Ohio. From game day to work day, First Bank of Central Ohio is proud to support the business owners that keep Central Ohio thriving. They're locally owned, business focused, and always in your corner. Give them a visit at fbcentralohio.com. Now, Chase, as you said, they did not cover, but you can forgive them for not covering in the sense that this was the loftiest spread in a game this season that they've faced that did not come against an FCS opponent. They were 28.5 point favorites against Ohio. They missed covering that by half a point, and that was their non-conference closer much earlier in the season, not quite sharp into form yet. If you'll recall, that was like the game where Bo Jackson was actually like proved that he should probably be taking over the backfield. So it speaks to how far things have come for this team as a whole since then. This game started out very weird. We had a touchdown on the first play for Bo Jackson, what we thought was going to be the signature highlight of the Ohio State version of Bo Jackson's career so far. It was called back on a by the letter of the law block in the back, I will say. If you want to throw the flag, you're well within your right to throw the flag. However, there is that spiritual rule about football where it's like if a penalty is going to otherwise cancel out what was a pretty cool play,
Hmm.
just let it go. Come on. And they didn't want to do that. Obviously, the refs had Purdue plus 29.5. What can you say? That being said, plenty of time still left. Ohio State pretty much dominated this one pillar to post. Purdue didn't break 100 yards passing or receiving or rushing rather by the end of the game. And if you take away the interception that Julian Sayin had, which came in a I don't know if you want to call it goal to go situation, but they were well deep into the red zone. Looked like they were going to get another touchdown on top of the three they already had at that point. And then you take away the garbage time touchdown Purdue had after the 2-minute warning when the game was already 34-3 at that point. Suddenly you're talking about a game that could potentially end 41-3 instead of 34-10. And that's not even counting the Bo Jackson touchdown that got taken away at the end of the game. So when you frame it as 41-3 versus 34-10, you're really just splitting hairs. That's still an over 3-score victory. It's a dominant win. Yeah, they didn't cover, but it's more of a bad beat than an outright bad bet if you took the spread in that circumstance. So, with all that being said, what I'm wondering from you is there's plenty of things that if you want to be upset about them given the quality of opponent, you can be. And I'm sure that there will be other people I talk to this week, not naming any names, that will get into where they felt let down relative to what needs to improve before the postseason. But Chase, you're a very well adjusted individual. So what I'm wondering is what are you choosing to focus on coming out of this game where you can feel let down if you want to be, but you probably shouldn't given it was still a 24-point win.
Yeah, a few things. The last thing I'll say about the spread, I did pick Ohio State to cover.
We all picked
Now
Ohio State
thinking,
to cover, by the way.
now thinking about it, in hindsight, this was a Purdue team that a week earlier had gone into Ann Arbor and only lost to Michigan by 5 points in a 21-16 final.
Yep.
Ryan Day had made it clear throughout the week that This was a Purdue team that's getting better under Barry Odom. I know that they were 2-7 coming into this game. They're now 2-8, which doesn't scream that they're a great football team, but they are a team that it seems to be building something in year one under Barry Odom, particularly on defense. Ryan Day was very he provided a lot of praise for Barry Odom in the way that he structures his defense schematically. He even said at one point this week that when there was a defensive coordinator opening, I'm assuming when Ohio State promoted Kerry Combs, that he had approached Barry Odom about being Ohio State's defensive coordinator. Like, that's how highly Ryan Day thinks of Barry Odom as a coach. And so when I look at this game holistically, I think there are some things that I take away that were positives, particularly that Julian Sayin and Jeremiah Smith continue to build their Heisman cases. I think outside of a very uncharacteristic interception from Julian Sayin at the end of a very long drive for Ohio State, he had an excellent game. I think he had probably one of his best throws of the season, that touchdown that he had to Jeremiah Smith, where he rolls out left in the pocket. He sets his feet. He delivers a beautiful ball over the middle of the field to his streaking Jeremiah. And I also think that Jeremiah Smith proved that, yes, while it is nice to have Carnell Tate opposite of him on a football field, he doesn't need Carnell Tate opposite of him on a football field to be a game wrecker, to be someone that transcends a defensive game plan, even of the likes of a coordinator and head coach like Barry Odom. And then I think that there was some positives to take away in the run game. I know that the offensive line has been under some scrutiny, particularly Tiger Shabola. But I do think that Ohio State's running backs ran well. Bo Jackson, Isaiah West. CJ Donaldson has proven once again that he is a touchdown vulture near the goal line. He's going to be the running back that punches in those short yardage situations. He had like 5 carries for 12 yards and 2 touchdowns. It's a pretty great stat line from CJ. And then overall, the defense played really well. I think that, you give up 3 points to Purdue. Eventually, your second teamers give up the additional 7 at the end of the game to give the Boilermakers their 10. But I think when Ohio State starters were on the field, they were able to pretty much get what they wanted defensively and keep that Purdue offense at bay. So there was still some positives, I think, to take away. Maybe if you look a little bit more analytically from a film perspective on going, watching back on what particularly things were happening in the all 22 and maybe even on a rewatch, I would probably see a few things that maybe bring up some concerns. But overall, I feel pretty good about Ohio State's performance. A 24-point win at Ross-Ade Stadium, which has been a house of horrors for Ohio State over the years. And particularly, it's always just gray there. Do you ever notice when you're watching the game, it's 50 degrees and cloudy. There's not an inch of sun peering through those clouds ever. It just always kind of provides this sleepy environment that Ohio State has to overcome. So I do think that that's a factor as well.
Yeah, I mean, you grow up in the Midwest, you know the drill in
Yeah,
at least the
you know
early
what it
part of
looks like.
November.
Yep.
I think you bring up a very good point relative to Carnell Tate because if you want to, it's funny. We've referred to them as wide receivers 1A, 1B all season. Both of Ohio State's wide receiver ones relative to Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate. But, going even further, if you want to expand it out to who are the most important players in Ohio State's offense this season, it's unequivocally Julian Sayin, Jeremiah Smith, and then Carnell Tate. Like, so one of the top 3 players in this offense in terms of not only production but importance. And I don't know. I can't imagine that our entire staff would have assumed that Ohio State would win by at least 30 points if we had known going into this game that Carnell Tate wasn't going to be available. It's not a
Mhm.
slight to Brandon Ennis or Mylan Graham or any of the other receivers in the room, because we know that even if they maybe aren't on that at that level at the moment, we're all confident that they're going to be able to fulfill on similar levels of production one day, given the pattern of work that Brian Hartline has put in. That being said, for any football team to lose one of its 3 most important offensive players in a surprise fashion right before kickoff, that can devastate a lot of teams, regardless of who the opponent is. And so for Ohio State to respond, and the saying has been going on for a long time, we don't rebuild, we reload. for them to just reload and go about the game the way that they did, it speaks to not only the resolve of the team overall, but also its ability to have people step up when other people get hurt, when things don't go perfectly. So I think they do deserve a lot of credit there that they're probably not going to get. I think it was the right move that if they were worried about, and we still don't have a lot of clarity on what the injury is. We just know that something came up and it was precautionary. A lot of the speculation has been something with a hamstring, which is usually one of the tricky injuries to navigate if you're a receiver or really any football player that relies on explosive movement, which is most of them, to be fair.
Mhm.
You would you are happy that they held him out of a game in which they were largely expected to win and which they ultimately did. So a lot of weird circumstances. It's West Lafayette. You figured that that was going to happen. And then there was more weird stuff on top of weird stuff, as I alluded to, with the team probably getting a bit of an adrenaline dump after the Bo Jackson touchdown got called back. All things considered, I think things worked out pretty well. Now, the other interesting thing at this point coming out of this game and what happened in week 11 was you had Indiana surviving the upset bid that Penn State put forth. Indiana, speaking of teams that didn't cover, were, I think, 15-point favorites, and they were looking like
Yeah.
they were on a good trajectory for that about not quite midway through the third quarter, but into the second half, they were up 20-7 at one point, and then they completely blew that lead and allowed Penn State to go up 24-20. Fernando Mendoza threw an interception that put Penn State in a go-ahead position. Penn State actually even got the ball back after forcing Indiana to punt when it already had the lead to where it could have just salted the clock away. But then they had to give the ball back to Penn State or to Indiana rather. And Fernando Mendoza was able to guide the team on a drive, which included or was punctuated by one of the best catches of the year that you'll see from Omar Cooper Jr. Just an inhuman toe tap where it literally looked like the foot that was going to touch out of bounds just kind of levitated over the ground when it almost certainly seemed like it was going to be the first foot to come down. I would assume you've seen the replays of it. You haven't, would highly recommend checking it out. But that a lot of people, including Gus Johnson, who was making the call as the play was happening, assumed that that was going to be something that vaulted Fernando Mendoza to the front of the Heisman race. Saying information or interception notwithstanding, this was his third straight game with over 300 yards passing and 80% of his passes at least completed. He's now done that, I believe, 5 or 6 times. I think he's done it 5 or 6 times this season, and I believe he's done it 5 times this season. And
5, yeah.
and Will Howard did it 6 times in the regular season last year himself, and then twice in the college football playoff. And Will Howard has more games with 80% completion percentage by far than any other quarterback in Ohio State history, despite the fact that he only played one season here. So that speaks to the level of play that Sayin has conducted himself at in his own first season as starter this year. All of that is to say, it seems like a three-horse race for the Heisman Trophy right now. And Ohio State is fortunate enough to have two of those horses in the form of Sayin and Jeremiah Smith. It seems like we are headed for a collision course chase for the Big Ten championship, assuming both teams make it there. Indiana's pretty much already clinched its spot. Ohio State, it seems like they're on a good course to make it, but they're still going to have to beat Michigan in addition to UCLA and Rutgers. Assuming that these teams both win out the regular season they made in the Big Ten title game, seems like the winner of that game is going to ultimately determine who wins the top individual honor in college football. So my question for you is, given where we're at right now, who do you feel most comfortable about winning the award if we do get to the point where these teams meet in the Big Ten championship?
That's a good question. I would have to go with who I think is the better team, and it's Ohio State. You know, whether or not this is fair, wins are a quarterback stat. I'm sure Bo Nix feels really good about that truth, considering the way that Denver won their game on Thursday against the Las Vegas Raiders. Because Bo Nix, for those that don't know, played one of the worst games I've seen an NFL quarterback play, but the Broncos win because their defense is awesome. So I would imagine that Ohio State going into that game would be favored. I think maybe even there were some lines that were floated out there, teased out there on social media within the past week or two that Ohio State would be a 3.5 point favorite in a game against Indiana at the Big Ten championship. Yeah, so I think that Julian Sayin probably has the leg up just by a hair. I think the odds reflect that as well, at least on FanDuel, where Julian Sayin is a plus 140 and Fernando Mendoza is at plus 150. Like they're really neck and neck. I also think that Julian Sayin's going to benefit from playing a little bit weaker competition, particularly against the pass. None of the next three opponents that Ohio State has rank inside the top 25 in pass defense. I believe the best of the three is UCLA. And Indiana was a team that beat UCLA 56-6 a few weeks ago. And Fernando Mendoza had an excellent game against them. So I don't think that the UCLA pass defense, for it being of the stature of close to a top 25 defense, that the numbers probably are not telling us the full truth there. But I
And they're
just
going to be a West
imagine,
Coast team making
correct.
an East Coast road trip for a
Exactly.
Saturday night game as well.
So, and that's not to say that Fernando Mendoza is not also going to have stats over the next 3 weeks. I just don't imagine that Julian Sands going to put himself in a position where he would remove himself from the Heisman race over the next 3 weeks. Now, the most important thing for Sand is going to be beating Michigan. The last two times Ohio State has had a quarterback in contention for winning the Heisman Trophy, whether it be CJ Stroud or Will Howard last year, because that narrative was kind of building leading up to the Michigan game. The loss to Michigan effectively knocked both quarterbacks out of contention. They could have finished as a finalist. CJ Stroud did the 2 years that he was Ohio State starter. But unless you beat Michigan, unless you lose to Michigan, I should say, if you're Julian Sayin, I think you at least have an invite to New York, and I think you're probably either going to win the trophy or you're going to finish second. And then you also just kind of have to monitor what Ty Simpson's doing down at Alabama. The voters seem to be giving him a lot of credit for each of the performances that he's had this year. And you don't know what a performance for him down the stretch, and even in the SEC championship game, could do for his odds as well. So I would say I feel most confident in Julian Sayin. But it will, I think, as you were inferring, the winner is going to determine who ends up hoisting that stiff arm trophy. And I would give Ohio State the edge over Indiana at this current time.
Yeah, I think the voters and the media in general tends to be prisoners of the moment, and so while
Yeah.
heaven forbid that SEC candidate comes out of nowhere and suddenly inserts themselves into the race, I don't think it's totally far fetched if Alabama runs the table at this point that Ty Simpson would be a realistic threat to win the award himself. That being said, if one of these two quarterbacks is undefeated after the Big Ten championship, which is almost certainly going to be the case, and
Yep.
one of them in the final game that the voters see before casting their ballot has seen one defeat the other, and they're still the clear top two candidates, you would think that that's probably going to determine the winner outright. I think that the only shot that Jeremiah Smith has at this point is Ohio State would need to win out, but all of its games would have to be very similar to the ones that Julian Sayin just had against Purdue, where he's still very productive as a passer, where Smith is able to catch in the realm of 10 passes for well over 100 yards, but the passing touchdown volume is low enough, and the amount of mistakes that Sayin has made relative to how high his completion percentage has been is enough where it's like, okay, this guy is good, but Smith is what is allowing this team to stay as one of the elite offenses and the best team in college football. And it's evident in the production that he has had down the stretch, which is a very thin rope to walk. Smith could have a bunch of great games, but if Sayin is having just as good, if not better, games reflected in the amount of touchdowns he's thrown, which has been the case in most of Ohio State's wins this year, it's a quarterback award to lose at this point. It's a sad reality, but it's the truth. So I would agree with you in your assessment that I do feel like Sayin should deserve to be the favorite at this point. I think the one knock that you have against him is that he hasn't really had his signature Heisman moment at this point, just because it's as Ty Simpson's presumably favorite target, Ryan Williams, like to say about Vanderbilt in the offseason. It's like killing ants with a sledgehammer. Like that's basically
Yeah.
what's. And if Sayin does that all the way to a Heisman Trophy, I have to admit, if removing my Ohio State fandom from it, it's kind of lame. But you know what? We haven't had a Heisman winner since Troy Smith, even though there have been plenty of suitors. And I'm not going to look a gift horse in the mouth. I would be over the moon if Sayin's able to get it. Obviously, I would imagine he and everybody else involved with this team would rather defend Ohio State's national title above all else. But especially given how much Ohio State quarterbacks after they leave Columbus, the national media loves, and NFL fans in general love to criticize their play when they get to the next level. It would be great, especially for the rep that Ryan Day has turned in relative to developing quarterbacks, if one of them could actually get a Heisman Trophy. It's kind of annoying to look across the Big Ten and see Lincoln Riley and think about how many Heisman trophies that guy's quarterbacks have won, and we still don't have one for our own guy over here yet. So I think he's due. It
Yeah.
should be his time. Ohio State's going to have to take care of business down the stretch here to get it done, but I think assuming they do, it would be Julian Sayin's award to lose at this point. So I think
Yeah,
we would.
I think that the moments, the what you said about the moments, I think that matters far more for Jeremiah Smith than it does for Julian Sayin,
I
just
think you're right
because of
about
the
that.
nature of their position, right? Like, take the NFL for example. Right now, Jackson Smith and Jigba has a very strong case to be the MVP. If you looked at the odds, I guarantee you he's not even close to the top five. Saquon Barkley last year had almost 2,000 yards rushing. Maybe he did eclipse 2,000, but he didn't get the NFL single season rushing yards record. Uh, it just is a nature of the positions that if you're not a quarterback, you need to have moments that go viral, and they need to be happening almost every week.
Like
Or the
Jonathan Taylor
production.
scoring an 83-yard touchdown in Berlin on Sunday
Exactly
morning.
right. Exactly right. You just need those moments. But again, quarterback winning is a stat that goes and is attributed to quarterbacks because you're the leader of the offense, you're the leader of the team. And so if a team is undefeated and has a guy that's leading that team who is in contention for the Heisman Trophy, there's a pretty good chance that he's going to win it. Unless there's another player that comes along and just has moments week after week that stick with voters in the back of their minds, I just don't see that there would be any way for a player like Jeremiah Smith, as great as he is, to win the award over a quarterback with those circumstances.
Yeah. That's unfortunate, but at the same time, we have another year of Jeremiah Smith to look forward to after this
Yeah.
somehow.
Maybe
So
it's saying this year and Jeremiah next. Who knows?
then that would be something. That would be really, really cool, especially because in the post game interviews that you guys conducted while I was trying to find what patches of quotes I could from Barry Odom in wake of the destruction that happened. It was cool that you guys both interviewed Smith and Sayin, and each one of them said that they thought the other guy should win the Heisman Trophy. I think that speaks to the selflessness within this team and the chemistry that these guys have. And given that they're going to be throwing to each other for at least one more season, barring somebody getting some crazy NIL deal or something that would prompt them to leave if they're not happy. But how could they not be happy here in Columbus?
Yeah,
I think, yeah, that would be crazy if one of them won the Heisman one year and then the other guy got it the other. I mean, that at that point you're probably talking about these guys as the best quarterback receiver tandem in college football history, barring what happens in the postseason, I think. But that being, although I don't know, maybe they do need one or two national championships to give
yeah,
Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase a run for their money in that department.
sure,
At least one Heisman Trophy to compete with those guys, but
yeah,
I would like to see it. All
yeah,
right. Well, Chase, thank you very much for joining us. And yeah, I think that was a pretty pleasant way to look at this game, all things considered, when I'm sure there's a whole section of the lunatic fringe rumbling and grumbling about what happened on Saturday. This is we're again in a very spoiled position, and it's definitely better to look at these games as glass half full than glass half empty. I think everybody would have a much healthier outlook and a happier life if we tended to do that, especially because the games actually worth stressing over haven't even happened yet. We're still 2 or 3 weeks away from the first one that's going to drive us insane. So cherish your sanity while it's still here, Buckeye fans, and we'll help guide you there along that path here on the Dubcast. So thanks for tuning in. We'll be back with Kyle Jones tomorrow, who I imagine is going to be a little less graceful about what happened this weekend than Chase was, but I'm sure he'll have good things and to say just like Chase did. But I know I, we just say I already know from things that he's told us privately that there's plenty of things for him to scrutinize this week on film study. So it's going to be one you're definitely going to want to tune into on Thursday afternoon. Until then, we'll be back tomorrow morning. Chase, thank you for joining us. Thank you to our sponsor at First Bank of Central Ohio. And we will see you tomorrow for the Tuesday episode. Take care, folks.